roof blazing. Party in the city where the heat is on all night on the beach till the break of dawn. Welcome to Miami. Bouncing in the club where the heat is on all night on the beach till the break of dawn. I'm going to Miami.
Welcome to Miami, and with that brings us into Week 7 of the NFL action. My name is Drew Greeno, coming to you live from the great state of Florida, Miami specifically, as William Smith just proclaimed in his song. Just looking at the predictions from last week, went 4-1 on the week, bringing my total up to 14-16 on the season, trying to get to that 500 mark. Still a little early, we can make this happen. Big week last week for Bill, getting up to 500, third win in a row. Sean broke the snide by getting a much-needed victory last week. And Ryan continues to solidify his top spot in the league with only one loss. But still some time left. There's still a lot of games to be played. So let's get right into the action here. Looking first at Sean versus Adam. Big win, as I mentioned, for Sean last week, breaking a long losing streak, while Adam is trying to stop his little nosedive with 2 consecutive losses, trying to get it back on that winning side of things. Foles has a bye this week for Sean, so he's got Joe Flacco at home against Atlanta. Really like the matchup. Traditionally has played well at home, and Atlanta has not played well on the road, so that definitely bodes well for Sean there. Really like his pickup of Brandon Oliver a few weeks ago. He's really got a little Darren Sproles in him. He even has the same jersey number. So even when Ryan Matthews returns, I really like for him to be productive, specifically catching passes out of the backfield. Speaking of catching passes, Sean's really going to need some production out of his wide receiver position, specifically Terrence Williams. That's the guy I'm looking at. Only had 2 catches last week. Need a little bit more out of him for Sean to have a higher point total. I really like, in terms of the trade that was consummated between these two gentlemen, I like Adams' early return. He's got Forsett against Atlanta, and Percy Harvin's in the insane asylum that is the New York Jets. So I definitely like what Adam got here, specifically for this week. So I like Forsett to have a good game. Randall Cobb leads the league right now for Adam in receiving touchdowns. Going to be tough to keep that pace going, but really need to watch him moving forward. He's starting to turn into a touchdown-dependent player. Hasn't been doing much else with Jordy Nelson catching the bulk of the passes, so we need to monitor Cobb and see if he can hold on to that strong performance. After Ivory gave him a really solid performance, the guy I'm looking at, though, is Sankey. Not thrilled that he's in Adams' lineup. I know he doesn't have much choice because McCoy's on a bye, but Sankey's the guy for me that I'm a little concerned about. Even with the good start from Ivory, I'm going to take Sean to win this one. I think he's got enough firepower across the board to lead him to victory. The next matchup that we have right now is Dennis versus Dave. Dennis is trying to get over that 500 mark with a win, while Dave is hoping to get there with a victory this week. He had a narrow win last week, so he's hoping to keep it at 2 in a row. Dennis is really maintaining his status as someone who's not able to find that accurate running back, the guy who can produce for him. This week's candidate is Isaiah Crowell from the St. Louis Rams, who really is in the midst of a huge running back committee there, so I'm not wild about him this week for Dennis. I do like his wide receivers, specifically DeSean Jackson and Dez Bryant this week. I think they're in line for big games. I think Dennis might have the best wide receiving core in the entire fantasy league here, so I like for them to both have good games. Drew Brees is back in the lineup, which normally would be a good thing, although Brees has really not had a great season thus far. Graham is questionable. Sean's telling me there's a possibility that he could play this week, so we'll have to monitor that, but if he's without Graham for the week, he's got the number 1 defense in Detroit, so that could be a problem. Brees is a little bit of a question mark right now for me. Guy I'm watching for Dave's squad, Odell Beckham. He's a guy that has been elevated to the wide receiver 2 position now that Victor Cruz is out for the season, so really need to monitor him. I think he's going to start catching a lot of passes in the near future here, so it could be a really big pickup for Dave. Speaking of wide receivers, Marcus Colston hasn't really done that great this year, but again, if Graham is out of the lineup, that's a guy that's going to benefit from getting more touches from Brees. If for me, Dennis had any sort of remnants of a running game, this would be a much closer matchup, but I like what Dave was already able to do in the Thursday games. He's got Vereen and Brady, who had already had big games, so that's going to help in my prediction because I'm actually going to take Dave. I think that those Thursday night performances are going to carry him to a victory this week against Dennis. The next matchup that we're looking at today is Bud versus Bill. Bud keeps putting up those high totals, but his record doesn't seem to reflect his really strong performances, while Bill is really hoping to get over that 500 mark. He's looking for his 4th consecutive victory, so a pretty nice little run here for Bill. Jordy Nelson, we talked about him a little earlier. He's been an absolute stud for Bud. Really like that Rodgers-Jordy connection this week as they take on the Panthers defense that is in decline right now. So I like for Jordy and Rodgers to both have really strong games. Le'Veon Bell has really been one of the most consistent guys for Bud in fantasy this year. He continues to see tons of catches and touches out of the backfield. He's got Houston on Monday Night Football, so I look for that to continue with Le'Veon Bell. If you want to look at one weak spot for Bud, I would say that it's Frank Gore. Frank really hasn't had that breakout game this year. He's been a little quiet this year, so I'm not thrilled that he's got Denver in that Sunday night game. So that's definitely going to be somebody we need to watch for Bud's squad. Looking at Bill's squad, he's got Steve Smith, who's really turned into that number one target in Baltimore. Flacco loves throwing to him, and as we mentioned with the Atlanta secondary, it's horrendous. So I'm looking for Smith to find the end zone this week. It was impressive to see Larry Fitzgerald come back to form last week. He had Carson Palmer back in the lineup, which certainly helped. So I think that really is going to be something that we're going to be seeing some positive advancements for Fitzgerald moving forward with Carson Palmer throwing the ball to him. Guy I'm a little concerned about for Bill is Alfred Morris. He hasn't broken 100 yards in any of the games this year, and even though Tennessee's not great against the run, I'm just not sold on him. I just don't think he's that great of a running back. So I look for him to be, eventually he's going to get sort of weaned out of the offense. I think they're going to end up going with somebody else out of the backfield. Could be Roy Halou in the future. Even though I think this is going to be a great contest, for me, I think Bud's roster is just way too consistent for Bill to handle. I like for Bud to move on with the victory this week, getting him up to 4-3 on the young season. That brings us to myself versus Steve DeFerrari. A little bit of a setback for me last week losing to Bill, while Steve's really trying to figure out, does he want to be on the right side of 500 or does he want to be on the wrong side of 500? We're about to find out with his matchup this week. For Drew, Phillip Rivers, really, MVP season. There's really no other way to say it. He's had a really nice start to the season. He's been distributing the ball really well amongst the wide receivers and running backs and tight ends in San Diego. So I like for him to continue that strong play, and he's got Kansas City at home this week, so that seems pretty good. Calvin Johnson's out of the lineup again this week, so that really frees up things for Golden Tate. He's got New Orleans, which really has a bad secondary, so he could really exploit that option and should see a ton of targets. If you want to look at a position of interest for Drew, it's really the tight end spot. Jordan Reed's in there right now. He had a really strong game last week, but he has been injury prone and it has not really done much else other than having one good game. So we need to watch him and see how he does. For Steve, if you want to look at that tight end position, Jordan Cameron finally woke up last week with a nice game, found the end zone against Pittsburgh. This could be a good sign of things to come. He's got a pretty soft schedule moving forward, so he's got Jacksonville this week. He really could start to build on that momentum with Brian Hoyer at quarterback. And speaking of momentum, Steve has Fred Jackson, who continues to get double-digit points. He's only scored less than double digits in one game thus far this year. So Fred Jackson really a strong season thus far for Steve, which is a good thing. Speaking of running backs, though, Zach Stacy, a little bit of a concern. We talked about it a little bit with Dennis's team. There's really more of a running back committee now in St. Louis, so it remains to be seen how valuable Stacy's going to be in the future. He's also been dealing with a little bit of an injury, so for Steve, that could be a little bit of a problem this week in the matchup. Even though Edelman did have a relatively low point total for his standards on Thursday night, I still think that Drew's balance is really going to carry him this week. He's got good depth. He's got some guys that are ready to break out like Andre Ellington and potentially Jamal Charles. So I'm going to take Drew myself to win this week and get to his third victory of the season. And that brings us to our matchup of the week. We have the brotherly love matchup of Cam versus Ryan. Number 2 versus number 1, Cam versus Ryan, to see who will get the bragging rights for the Ahern household for the week. Cam's really been sticking with Russell Wilson over Stafford since Calvin Johnson's been out of the lineup. It really worked the first week. It didn't really work as much last week because he didn't have a great game against Dallas, but he does have St. Louis this week, so I like for him to be a little bit better than last week's performance. Bennett really's only had one bad game for Chicago this year, and he's got Miami at home. I think that's a good chance for him to find the end zone again, as Cutler really likes to look for him in the red zone. So Bennett, solid performer this year, and just remains to be consistent, and I think that will continue. CJ Spiller, again, with the decline, I know Cam is really pushing for him to have a good game. it's going to be something that's going to take some time, and I'm not really sure that this is the week. He's got Fred Jackson in front of him, but he does have Minnesota. So, if he can somehow find the end zone, that's really going to be a big help for Cam in his matchup against Ryan. So now looking at Ryan's team, if you see here, he's got Shorts in the flex position right now. Had a whopping 16 targets for Jacksonville last week. So it seems like Bortles likes him. That could be good for the future. I think that really could help Ryan's point total, specifically out of the flex position. Big game for Sanu last week in the absence of A.J. Green. Since Green's not going to be playing this week, you got to like for Sanu's chances. Again, he's the number one wide receiver, and they're going to be playing Indy, so they're going to be throwing the football against that defense. Guy I'm a little concerned about is Matt Ryan. Normally I wouldn't be concerned about him, but he is playing on the road. If you look at his road numbers, they're not good. He hasn't played well. Atlanta hasn't played well on the road, so that's going to be a little bit of a concern for me. I think he might come in a little bit under what his projected total could be, so it's definitely something for me that I'm watching with Ryan's squad. But when you look at the overall matchup, I think Lynch is just going to have a monster game. I think they're going to run the ball a lot for Seattle against St. Louis on the road. So I'm going to take Ryan to take this one. He's going to stay in first place with the victory, and he will have the bragging rights for the Ahern household for the week. So there we go. There are the picks for the week. Hope you enjoyed it. I apologize again for the delay in posting everything. But I am about to enjoy some Florida nightlife, so I'm going to let Will Smith ride it out for you. See you next week.
I'ma scoop me something hot in this house. I'ma bring game mountain pot. Hottest club in the city and it's right on the beach. Temperature, get the it's about to reach 500 degrees in the Caribbean seas with the hot mommy screaming.